Welcome back into the Windsor Report, Monday edition. You may remember a few weeks back, I talked with Marcell Strbich about House Bill 472. What is that? That is a piece of legislation that state representatives Bernie Willis, he's a Republican from Springfield, and Bob Peterson, a Republican from Sabina, have introduced. And it focuses on two parts. One, closing a loophole that would allow potentially voters with an ID to vote, maybe if they're not legal citizens. But there's also a large cybersecurity portion of this bill regarding updating security standards on all election systems, amongst a variety of additional voting changes. And I'm going to welcome Marcell Strbich back in to give us an update on House Bill 472 and many of the layers that comprise the bill and why it's important here in 2024. Marcell, welcome back to the Windsor Report. How's your Monday, sir?
It's going well, Jack. Thanks, and I'm glad to be back with your audience. And I really look forward to covering this with you today.
You know, this is an important matter, and I don't want to wrap this in conspiracy theories. But anyone that looks back with a thoughtful eye on 2020 has a lot of questions, right? Voter integrity and election integrity takes on a lot of different facets. It's everything from making sure that the information voters get is accurate and they have a First Amendment right and things don't get suppressed. It's making sure that people vote in elections are certified and qualified to vote. It's making sure that they don't vote more than once. It's making sure that dead people don't vote. But there's also this cybersecurity component, which, given what we've heard involving China, involving some other nefarious forces, some hacking going on in the international and national community, the cybersecurity part of election integrity is pretty significant, isn't it, Marcell?
100%. You know, in the last 20 years, Ohio's really universally adopted electronic voting system products and services, like most states have, right? And that's fine. It's brought us convenience in many ways, and certain facets of it's enabled election administration. But at the same time, the laws in our state and beyond have not kept up to date with the innovation and technology that have evolved. And I'll give you a few examples and a big driver in what we've sought to do within this bill. There's really four parts to this bill. We want to introduce a military-grade cybersecurity certification standard, right? Our standards go back to 2004, at a time before the iPhone, and that's how we have essentially allowed federal agency, in this case the Election Assistance Commission, to certify a voting system. And at that point, we were only certifying voting machines, markers, and tabulators. But since then, the industry's consolidated on the election side. And in 2019, a report came out from Brennan Center of Justice. 80% of the voting systems in use today are really under the purview of three vendors. So a successful cyber attack against any one of those could have consequences for elections across vast parts of the country. That's understood, because in our Ohio House in 2019, we passed a bill that actually enacted something that most states don't have, called the Ohio Cyber Reserve, under the Adjutant General. And this particular group of all volunteer Ohioans with very high level of acumen and cybersecurity credentials are able to play an important role, and have been since 2019, to help cyber defense posture within our state. And they've been tested already. And at the time, our Secretary of State, who's in office today, was correct in pointing out that every election system is vulnerable to an ever-changing security environment. And in 2020, that security environment evolved and changed again. We had the SolarWinds attack, which was an entity that was doing business management solutions. And that part of the equation and how they introduced those attacks into the software update stream is what this bill is really intended to do, is to look at that through independent security reviews and to upgrade our voter registration databases, which do not have either a federal or a state security standard right now in place.
So let's talk about that for just a second. You said update the voter registration database that lack a federal or state standard. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we wrote our laws, there was a federal law passed in 2002, which essentially gave the purview to do the certification standards and inspections to the Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal non-advisory agency with no enforcement and no statutory credentials granted to it in order to certify voting systems beyond voting machines, markers, and tabulators. And so industry does what industry does. They come out with new products and services, and they sold e-poll books which were the digitized version of our signature poll book, right, that we all see when we go and we go to identify at a polling place, and also voter registration database. So this 472 bill establishes those certification standards to the highest level for all voting systems. So we do it at the state level versus relying on a federal agency without statutory credentials, which is what we've been doing for 20 years, if that makes sense.
It does. It's complex, but that's okay. And so the bill number is 472, and what I'm hearing is it has provisions baked in that would require folks who have an ID to also be qualified to vote. It also is creating standards for these new things like e-poll books and voter registration databases. Again, not to be conspiratorial, give us a glimpse as to why that's so important. Those are gaps, right, between sound practice and unsound practice. What's the challenge with not shoring up those gaps?
A lot of people don't understand this, Jack, and I want your audience to understand this. Cybersecurity is not an end state. It's not a thing. Continuous monitoring. And so we have to stay up to speed with the degree and the level of the threat. And so the best way to do that is to understand where that threat emanates from. So going into 2020, you'll often hear election officials and others say, hey, our systems are not connected to the internet. That's fine. But there's also a supply chain compromise. And that supply chain compromise is sometimes even more crucial to assess, and it's really the vendors that have full purview over that, right? Because it's the vendors that are developing and designing these systems, and they're not transparent. They're not available for us to assess, or at least haven't until this bill has come out. And now what we're saying to the vendors is, that's great. You're developing and you're working with third-party capability developers, which could be overseas. In many cases, they are. I'm not saying now for voting systems, I'm saying for anybody, because that's where it's cost beneficial for a vendor to do business. And so they'll develop their software and they'll introduce it into the product and they'll release patches and updates over time. And if we don't understand their security development practices, which this bill brings to the surface and requires our Ohio Cyber Reserve to do an independent security assessment of, and to also publish that so that we have visibility on it, then we'll be in a position for everyone to confidently say, I do have confidence that my voting system is being continuously evaluated, and I do believe that there's credentialed people, which is currently not the situation with our Board of Voting Machine Examiners. They do not happen to have a cyber credentialing capability. So we have to address this gap as soon as possible, and we have to ensure that we can continuously monitor the security of these systems.
So this would create a board that would oversee developing cybersecurity standards, reviews, and certification of all existing and new voting machines in the state. Would also give our newly established Ohio Cyber Reserve an opportunity to be a third-party assessor for validation of Ohio's voting systems. That sounds good, but some people would go, are you overcooking the grits? Wasn't there just a big hack job that should alarm us all if we're not protected to the hilt against something like it?
There was a very significant hack here. It's very new in the last couple of weeks. It's affected one of our partners, which is significant because the Department of Homeland Security works through the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency. And our state developed a partnership with them in 2019 to perform what's called network security monitoring services. We signed up. We were one of the first states to go that direction to identify known threats on our networks. Well, just a couple weeks ago, they were subject to a hack similar to what the SolarWinds attack occurred, where they worked off of access into a third-party software or business management solution entity, and then they stole thousands of credentials and access codes. So it's to be determined exactly if any of the credentials or access codes which were taken, in this instance from the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, are those that could be affecting any of our election networks monitoring services. And that's something that everybody should be asking and show concern toward.
And so DHS was hacked, and what I'm hearing is that the implementation of this type of system would provide a layer of protection to make sure that our systems aren't being hacked and that things aren't being manipulated electronically. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say it like this. There's 5 core functions to cybersecurity, and our Secretary of State and team are doing 3 of them through that partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. The other 2, coming in as identifying and protecting, really look at what the vendor is designing and developing their system to and the security testing and validation that they do. And now they're having them turn that homework in to our Ohio Cyber Reserve, which is an independent security assessor, and looking at that on a continuous basis and providing a recommendation to our non-credentialed board of voting machine examiners as to whether we should go forward and certify the system in Ohio. And if they fail their certification, then the vendor has to remediate and correct that before the system even gets put into use. So we're being very preemptive and we're being very proactive, and now we're creating a continuous review.
I'm talking with Marcell Strbich, House Bill 472. Stick with us, more on the other side here on the Windsor Report. Rounding third and heading home. Welcome back in to the final segment, Monday edition of the Windsor Report. I'm joined by Marcell Strbich. We're talking about House Bill 472. It is a bill really designed to protect our election integrity here in the state of Ohio. It does things like make sure that we have valid voters voting in our elections. And also, it creates layers of protection because, look, our elections are digital. And before we went to break, Marcell was talking about there essentially being 5 layers to protection. And I want to give you, Marcell, a chance to explain those layers and where Ohio might be a little weak and how this bill addresses that.
Yeah, thanks again, Jack. And so, yes, there are 5 core functions, right, within a risk management framework for cyber. And those are identifying the threat, protecting against it, detecting it, responding to it, and recovering. And so in 2019, when we made our partnership with the Department of Homeland Security and the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, we started to work the issue of network monitoring security monitoring services, which covered 3 of those 5 core functions of detecting, responding, and recovering. And in order to help our Secretary of State and really set Ohio apart from others as the first state to cover all 5, we proposed our 472 legislation, which introduces the military-grade cybersecurity certification standard for all voting systems. And the expectation is that the vendor who provides those voting systems and seeks to certify them in our state brings forward essentially their byproducts of how their system was developed and designed and turns it over to our Ohio Cyber Reserve for a security assessment review. And that covers us under the identifying and protecting portion, so that we are covering everything from the time that a system is designed all the way to the time that that system has been put in use, regardless of what the voting system is.
Excellent. So for me, again, you're kind of explaining calculus to a kindergartner here, me being the kindergartner. Look, if there are 5 protocols or 5 layers, to me, it seems like given the lack of confidence that many Americans and Ohioans have in election integrity, we need to shore those things up, make sure that those are part of the system, and that's what this bill does. A couple of minutes here. What can you tell us about where this bill is? It's new. Is it in committee? And do you know whether lawmakers in the House have an appetite to get it to the, or obviously to get it through committee first, but then eventually get it to the floor?
Yes, it has about 15 co-sponsors right now. Obviously, the primary sponsors are Representative Bob Peterson and Representative Bernie Willis. And at this time, it's being evaluated for committee assignments. And so it's really with the Speaker. My understanding is the Rules Committee is going to have some meetings and discuss that this week, along with other bills that are put forward. And we really want this bill to be brought into the committee as soon as possible. And so anything that our viewers or listeners can say to really bring this forward, we really got to set ourselves apart and put these accountability measures and oversight measures in place in the near term before our 2024 general election. It's going to take some time to implement the cyber side of this. Now, some of the other facets of the bill on the identity and citizenship verification and validation, that can come quick. That could even be done on some level through security directive. And we saw that, President Trump and Speaker Johnson just weighed in on this issue at Mar-a-Lago, and we're sitting on the state version of this bill to validate eligibility of electors. So we're really in a great spot having this already introduced. We just need prompt action to get this through a committee in the House and get some serious Senate consideration started here fairly soon as well, so that we can bring this thing across the finish line by summer.
Yeah, that's critical. And by the way, ohiohouse.gov is where you can go. Rules and Reference Committee, Jason Stevens, Scott Olslager, Allison Russo, Jay Edwards, Dontavius Gerals, Danny Isaacson, James Hoops, Michelle Grimm, Jeff LeRae, Adam Matthews, Sharon Ray, and Bill Seitz comprise Rules and Reference. So reach out to them, let them know that when this goes through committee, that this needs to be a priority in the Ohio House. They need to vote on it. They need to get it over to the Senate. By the way, reminder, the Ohio General Assembly is controlled by a super majority of Republicans. And I can tell you, based on my research and reading and interaction with Ohioans, it's Republicans who have more heartburn about whether our elections are secure and are done with integrity. Let me ask, I had Frank LaRose on Friday, and Frank talked about another bill that is really a manifestation from a report we did based on the special elections of last year. We know that a foreign national Swiss billionaire poured money into a Democratic dark money group, and that found its way, millions of dollars, into the Ohio special election. That bill is designed to shore up that loophole and make sure that type of money is out of Ohio elections. What do you think about the Secretary's appetite for this?
Well, I certainly hope he understands and recognizes that this bill would only support and work upon what he himself was supporting and unanimous on in Senate Bill 52, which was passed unanimously 92-0, and he had provided proponent testimony for the Cyber Reserve. At the time, he also obtained a Chief Information Security Officer, and then from there, it took off as far as his arrangements for network monitoring security services. So this would be the version of 2.0. In essence, that was 1.0, and this is 2.0. I think this could be a real legacy for him because he has been proactive in stepping forward. And I think if he recognizes that the group involved in this bill has really seeks to work with his office and help them in any way with implementation, highlighting this facet, I think he really will go from a gold standard, as he likes to point out, to a platinum standard. And so this is something that I think already is within line of being accomplished within the remainder of his time as Secretary of State, and a future Secretary of State who comes in will inherit a better system. And he's a military man, and he understands going into any organization, you always leave it better behind. So I, as a military man as well, understand and respect that in the way he's trying to run things. But I also want him to understand that this is about enhancing his cyber defense posture in a way that no other state has it.
Well, to me, it's a no-brainer. You want your standard operating procedure to be, as you put it, platinum. So we'll move from gold standard to platinum standard. And I hope that the Secretary sees that. I'll have him back on. I'll ask him specifically about House Bill 472, and that is the House Bill number. If you're listening, you need to reach out to your legislators. You need to let them know that this is important to you. We've got about 45 seconds here, Marcell. What can our listeners do beyond that, and what else do you want them to know here in closing?
Well, I wanted to know that there is a site if they want to learn about some of the provisions of it called Ohio 4 Truth, 4 being the number 4, so ohio4truth.com. And it breaks out very well, updates on different facets of the bill. It has an executive summary on there as well, which is a little bit easier to follow, and I appreciate the fact that she took some time. I know the topic can be complex, but it's important. It's really important we know what you can't see is really where the threat lurks, in my experience. And our nation-state actors or any domestic actors that gain access to these systems can cause a lot of issues. And we've really thought this through thoughtfully, and there are commercial solutions to solve these issues now. And thank you again, Jack, for showing interest in such an important topic. And we're going to continue to keep you posted along with the viewers on how this bill is progressing.
Marcell Strbich is working very hard on House Bill 472, and you can check out the entire bill. I don't know if you know this, listener, but you need to. Go to legislature.ohio.gov. All you have to do is type in House Bill 472. It'll pull the bill up. You can read the whole thing. The good news is probably within the next couple of days there will be a Legislative Service Commission summary of the bill that'll make it a lot easier. Marcell, thanks for spending time with us today.
Thanks. Great. Thank you. Bye.